Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Quantum Realms 2022. And today I'm going to try to bring my Zen on to talk to beautiful Jessica Delmar. Haven't caught up with Jessica for a while. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Jessica is part of our quantumhealers.com community. She is a oneness messenger. She is a writer and an intuitive energy reader, and she's been most active lately on Instagram. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Candace. Thank you for having me.
Oh, welcome. I'm truly thrilled to have you. Change up some of the energy from some of the other guests that we've had, because your energy truly is unique and it's truly different from some of the other people that I have talked to today. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about what you've been up to lately, what sorts of things your clients are talking to you about, your view of what's going on, and of course, your concepts and thoughts on our theme this year, power, integrity, and truth. So it's been a while since we've chatted, and the world has truly changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we spoke probably right before everything happened. 2019, was it?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really marvel at us as a community, meaning spiritual leaders, healers, and teachers, and going through the same thing all humans are going through, but I'm also watching with a lot of interest how some of us, and cheers, I've got my tea too.
Me too.
how we're going through it, because it's been wild. I've seen, many in our community shift and change in a big way. Some, very vocal and very strident, and others have become more filled with grace, and others have sort of figured out their voice and they stopped parroting a lot of things that were just sort of thrown around the community. And how would you describe, I know this is a tall order, but since we've talked, the last couple of years, how would you describe the energy, what people are going through, what we're going through now, and how you're actually, confronting all of that with your clients?
Yeah. The last couple of years, we know it's been all about duality, polarity, extremes, one side versus the other. And there's so much to that, right? Because essentially that helps us look at the duality within ourselves, most importantly. And for me, over the past couple of years, having that be like a forefront of everything, at least for me, it's been about, okay, how can I go a little bit more inward? And going back to the themes of this call and this week of Quantum Realms, integrity, power, and truth. It's all about what is your inner truth. It's about asking you, what is your inner truth? And everything in your reality is reflecting that to you. And the wide spectrum of everything that's going on, polarity, duality, is trying to get you to kind of like see all these different aspects of you. But not only that, right? Because that's where people stop. They see all the different aspects of them and where they identify with. Therefore, they choose a side. But essentially, if you take it one step further, it's asking you to look deep within yourself and see, hey, I'm laying out everything on the table for you to see yourself in all these different aspects. Now, how can you bring it together through essentially oneness and unity? That's the next step, right? That's the evolution. That's where we're headed through it all. But we have to walk through the darkness first.
Right, because I think there is, and I don't hear many people talk about this specifically. I wonder how you think about it. Meaning, first of all, let me acknowledge this idea of choosing a side, which is really funny because some people will approach me, whether they're in the community or just somebody that I happen to meet, out in my own real life world, and have a question about being on this side or the other of whatever issue. You may pick one, and I may have my own personal thoughts about how I want to lead my life, but with some of the bigger kind of world cultural issues, I'll be presented with something and I may respond in a way sort of like, well, I don't know that I have a side at all. I mean, it's not like it's a sports match and I have to sit on one side of the stadium or the other. How about I just don't have a side at all? And I find it fascinating that can really bother a lot of people. You must pick one. No, I don't want to. So I'd like your thoughts on that. But at the same time, going back to what you said about unity, there's this idea that the concept of unity, it could also be thwarted and taken into a place where I don't think any of us want to go, which is a controlled sort of, hive mind place where there's no individualism. So with all those big things, how do you respond to that?
Gosh, that's a lot. We'll break it down. But okay, so if we talk about the taking a side, right? And so again, everything that's happening in the world is trying to get you to see all these different aspects of you and how essentially, right, you can look at yourself in everything, right? See your reflection in everything, see how everything is connected, see the wholeness and the oneness of everything. Because step number one, we all know that we are ascending into a higher frequency state of us, right? We know this. And so the steps to get there is about embodying higher frequency states of consciousness. To get into higher frequency states of consciousness, it's about pulling together. That's all about witnessing, right? Through the greater bird's eye view, the greater perception of everything. It's kind of like seeing on the table a puzzle for what the puzzle is, right? Rather than being in the puzzle as a singular puzzle piece, right? You see the two different perspectives, and that's how you can always attain a higher state of consciousness in each moment. When we go back to kind of like taking a side, there's a lot of things happening right now within everyone's healing journey to get us into the next state, the next higher state of our consciousness, to see with a little bit more perception, right? The everything. But in order to do so, we have to go through all of the healing states within ourselves, which means peeling back a lot of the layers, a lot of the old programs, a lot of the wounds, a lot of the fears, all of that stuff, to essentially get back down to our inner child. So at this time, part of ascension is integration of the inner child. It's about embodying more of the inner child and letting that out to play. But to get there, you have to go through all of those layers. Now, the whole thing with all the strong polarity and duality that's going on the planet, again, is trying to get you to see yourself. It's also trying to get you to see all of the inner wounds, right? Because there's triggers all over the place. Triggers. Even taking a side allows you to see what you are so against, if that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. Especially if you have resistance to the other side. If you were to look at that, again, like how I was saying, you have to see yourself in everything. If you take that, for example, and you see what you're so resistant against, or what you're triggered so strongly against, you'll realize that if you sit with it and ask yourself, why am I so triggered? Why am I so against this thing? Why am I so for this thing? It will all lead you back through those inner layers of inner healing, essentially. And what I found, I'm going back to your first question in terms of what I've been working with my clients, is a lot about going back to those seeds of thought, which is essentially our, I want to say like birth wounds, if you will, childhood wounds that sparked a seed, which sparked the fragmentation of our self, essentially, how we identify as the self, ego, conscious, unconscious, all of those types of layers. And from a seed births a tree, right? So if you have a seed of fear, or a seed of wound, or a seed that comes from trauma, like most of us do through childhood, it has birthed a tree that you are now in the manifestation of. So it's all about, okay, how can I go back to the seed, that energetic seed, shift that energy, heal in many ways as you're going back through, in order to shift how the tree manifests, in order to shift the outcomes. And that's also part of our ascension journey. It's also part of embodying higher states of consciousness and frequency. We have to shift all of those smaller seeds of thought within ourselves, because it also essentially gets us back to our inner child too. The other thing that was coming through as you were talking about in terms of taking a side, when people want so much, right, to have someone take a side, it's all about validation, and they're validating their seeds of thought, right, essentially. So they're perpetuating the seed of thought that they have initially, that the reason why they're triggered, or all these things are coming up in their reality right now to get them to see, instead of allowing them to see inward in terms of how they're supposed to be healing and peeling back layers, they're asking for validation to keep this energy going. So there's one side, right? Because there's a big split happening, like you were talking about, people who need the validation to keep that energy perpetuated because that's comfortable, because that's what they've been doing for so long, versus the other people who really are seeing things for what it is, and seeing that greater connection in everything, feeling more so the tug from their higher self, the tug from their greater soul, asking them to step into the next level of their existence. And that means digging deep and doing all of that healing work.
It requires a lot of patience, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I always say that it's the healing work, at least during this time, is never really done. It's always like a constant thing, because we exist in this sort of spiral of energy where we're visiting a lot of things over and over and over again. But if you do the work to expand from an expanded point of view, right? So you're witnessing the same thing, whether it's a trauma or a fear or whatever, but with an expanded point of view. Therefore, you can heal it in a new way, peel back new layers.
I was catching up with some of your Instagram reels, and I noticed, to be very 3D about the next kind of question, you kind of move from these longer podcasts, I guess, into these smaller little things. And one of the last couple ones I think I listened to was about the inner child. And I thought about my own clients, and I thought about this conversation coming up, and I thought about my own life, frankly. I have given, just spontaneously, because of some of my dreams or some of my thoughts, I've started to take some of my own advice about inner child work that I've given to clients, and really started to think more about what my own inner child has been, well, quite frankly, demanding in the last little bit. And I'm a little surprised at the intensity of it, because it's certainly not a new idea for me at all. I assist clients with this stuff all the time. What I do find is a certain sort of surprising intensity and rawness to some of what's coming up, and it's a little surprising to me. And I often think, when I go through some of that, I often think of the collective, the human collective, as well. If I'm feeling this, I think that humans are probably going through a lot of that too.
Yeah. Well, the inner child is kind of foreign to a lot of people, right? Because they've built up so much stuff, so many layers, so much like shells, if you will, that surround the inner child. And I've done a lot of inner child healing work on myself, and I work a lot with clients as well, with like really breaking through those layers, those shells that protect the inner child. Because like I was saying, when you go through some sort of, fear, trauma, especially as a child, it splits, right? It fragments you in many forms of yourself. And that's also where the ego comes into play too, to protect that inner child, to create those shells around the inner child. But from my experience, kind of going into those layers, the deeper you go, the more vulnerable you become. And that's very uncomfortable for a lot of people. The first time the inner child was really exposed and unveiled to me, it felt, number one, it felt like kind of like a desolate place. It kind of showed me, it kind of showed me, like in the movie Inception, if you've ever seen it, that very, like the deepest place. I forgot what they call it in the movie, but it's like that place where you go and like hundreds of years can go by in like a flash kind of thing. And it's just very like a place of confusion too. It's like when you're not tending to your inner child also kind of doesn't know what's going on. It's been alone with itself for so long that you need to reestablish that connection with the inner child in a lot of ways. And it was also shown, in addition to being kind of like a desolate, kind of deserty place as well, naked and just like completely open, vulnerable. And to go from where we are today to that kind of place within us, it does feel very, again, uncomfortable. It feels so many things come up with it. It's very fragile. But it's kind of like soil that has, dried and started cracking. But the minute that you start watering it and start tending to it, the seeds can start growing, right? So that's all it really is it needs your attention. It needs your acknowledgement in a lot of ways. It needs you to see it, is what I've also experienced is so powerful, especially with all of those things that are arising from the inner child, right? That created those sort of chains and that bondage that the inner child is experiencing. In order to really free it, you have to witness those things. But that's essentially what a lot of people are scared to see. As that fear rises, as that trauma rises, as those things rise, they're like, nope, I've been stifling this down for so long, I don't want to see it. So it takes a lot, like you're saying, patience to sit with it and really feel it as it rises through you. That's the most important thing, and really see it.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about, again, society, the whole world. It's like humans, the collective human self is suddenly paying attention to its inner child, right? Because its inner child is so focused on trauma, and, so much is being unearthed about all kinds of trauma presented. Also control, children aren't allowed a lot of control of their own life, and there are forces at play constructing your experience. And here we are reacting in swaths of society with those kinds of things too. So it's not always just our own personal, what happened in our own little nuclear family. I'm having a real sense, I'm getting goosebumps as I'm even getting ready to say it. One of the reasons some of this, I think, is being unearthed in even me is because it's a global thing. It's this global shift of the bigger energies that you can't get away from them, can you? There's no getting away. I don't care where you are, what you live, or how you spend your days. You can't get away from that because you're part of the human collective.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to unity in a lot of ways too, right? We're connected to everything. So everything that's sort of exposing itself and opening, we're connected to in many ways. Yes, the collective, like you said, is purging, is doing its own cleansing and healing work, but it's happening through us as individuals. It's happening through our work, right? More and more people who start awakening, start doing the work on themselves, creates more of an open channel as a human being, as this body, as this channel. And the energy that makes up the collective expresses through our physical bodies, right? Therefore, when collective things start appearing, well, number one, there's so much happening right now to be released because there's so many more open people able to release that energy, right? There's so many more avenues for it to leave. So it wouldn't necessarily be erupting so much if say everyone was closed and unable to do the work, there wouldn't be any way for this collective energy to be released, right? Yeah. But the other thing is everything magnetizes, right? Everything, like attracts like type of thing. So the things in the collective that are rising that you very much connect with is because there's something within you that's sort of magnetizing that energy to move through you. A lot of energy transmutation, alchemy, all of that stuff, you really have to work with it, right? It's not just like a one and done thing. It takes feeling, it takes knowing, it takes direction. You have to move the energy. And the best way, everything is vibration, right? And if you think of vibration being emotion too, right? It holds so much power. So if you're able to take, for example, there being strong energy of lack in the greater collective consciousness. If you've also worked with strong energy of lack within your own life, within your own experience, then of course you're going to feel that collective energy of lack on such a grander scale too. But if you've done the work to release and really heal yourself of that energetic lack, but more importantly, it's all about transmuting the lack into abundance, right? Or the powerlessness into freedom, right? If you're able to understand how that channel works and how you can open that up, then that energy of the greater collective can move through you, through the work that you've already done, if that makes sense.
Yes. And I'm going to put you on the spot and say, I bet there's people who've listened to what you've just said and said, yep, now, Jessica, tell me how I do that. How do I do that? How do you answer them when people ask that kind of question?
It all starts with you, right? And a lot of people want to jump ahead and say, how can I help the collective, right? And of course, there are the people who need to do, and they need to get out there and work and help the collective. But at this point, it's so important to hold space. I always say holding space is the most important thing. But you have to be able to hold space from a place of empowerment, right? So you really have to look at yourself. And going back to like just self-awareness, your reflections of what's going on, how you're reacting, how you're responding to your world and the things, the duality, all of that stuff that we were talking about in the beginning, again, allows you to go deeper inward to know yourself a little bit more. And in knowing yourself, if you say, okay, I know that I have this thing in my childhood, this trauma that I haven't gotten over, and it's feeding my lack and powerlessness in my now moment. You know that you're not in a state of empowerment. You know you're still in a state of disempowerment. So if you were to do the work within yourself to shift that disempowerment to empowerment, or fear into love, lack into abundance, then you're able to hold space from that greater point of view, if that makes sense, from that greater perspective. And in doing all of that work, you're essentially raising your frequency in the process. You're opening up greater consciousness in the process. But back to your question, how do you do that? It's different for every single person. But like I was saying, utilizing your vibration is also very important, because everything is energy. We know, I want to say, work with what you know, right? And a lot of us know that sort of law of attraction thing, right? Vibrations, you go from feeling bad to feeling good, right? You know what it feels like to go from sad to happy, right? In doing that and in knowing what that feels like within yourself, you're transmuting energy right there, transmuting. The thing is, when working with those seeds of thoughts, like fear and all of that stuff, it's a little bit more complex. It's not necessarily like a 1-step, 2-step, 3-step kind of thing that I can give, because it's
I told you I was putting you on the spot. I mean, it's kind of a gotcha question. Of course it is. But I know that especially people who are just waking up will hear some of these words and they will say, I've heard this from that person. I've heard it from him. I just don't know what that means I'm supposed to do. And I actually say, well, there's it right there. It's the do thing. I don't know about the doing. It's more about understanding. And like you said before, looking.
Yeah. It's more about like an inner awareness, right? And it's different for every single person because every single person is in a different place in terms of how they're being aware. And like I was saying, there's so many layers too that you're you can only work with where you are. You may want to be, hey, you may want to go from, I'm in fear and I want to be in love tomorrow. But that's not necessarily how it works, right? You have to unfold layer by layer by layer. And like you were saying, it takes patience. It takes working with where you are, taking the next step, taking the next step, taking the next step. And a big thing that I like to explain how I do it, but of course it's different for every single person. But this was kind of like powerful in my own energy transmutation. Again, going back to feeling. Also, they're saying that it's different depending upon your gifts as well, right? What's your strengths? For me, I'm a very feeling person. I feel very deeply. And so in order for me to transmute energy, my ability to feel myself from something that was gripping and something that was so tight, or constricting, or resistant, into something that felt more ease, more flow, more open, I needed to feel my way through. And it presented to me through triggers, right? So if you have a trigger, and that's why I said, you have to be very aware of what's triggering you, what's, where you are in every moment. That's asking for you to look at yourself and saying, hey, something's rising for me right now. How can I address this? Because whenever something rises for you, it's giving you that opportunity to say, okay, if this thing that's rising feels constricting and feels like not good on that scale, how can I walk myself into a place where I can transmute this energy and make myself feel good? And it's all about how's your body holding on to it. I don't like feeling constricted. I don't like feeling in that very resistant place. So whenever that happens for me or triggers for me, I walk myself through it in terms of how I'm talking to myself, how I'm holding space for myself. Am I being kind to myself? Those types of things that eventually I can walk myself through a meditation, whatever, into feeling just more at ease, more letting go, being able to let go. But that doesn't mean that the work is done, right? It's going to come back up again. And then you address it again when it comes back up. But maybe the next time it comes back up, it doesn't feel as constricted because you did the work before, if that makes sense.
That was a really beautiful passage there. The one thing I want to definitely point out about, shifting from one sort of feeling to a more preferred feeling is to be very aware that you're not burying whatever unpleasant feeling that was on, and denying it, because we have learned over all these years doing that is like, that's the seed point of even disease and some chronic, terrible conditions, like some sorts of cancers and things like that. I mean, when I have clients who come who may have certain kinds of, let's say, breast or uterine cancers, well, I know we probably ought to talk about nurturing and mothering and those kinds of relationships. And what I have said for many, many years too, here we are this, and again, so we're going back to societal versus individual. You read any announcement that somebody is ill, or even if somebody has passed, about things like, I'll just stick to breast cancer, and you'll hear statements like, she fought this big, courageous battle. She battled cancer for 10 years, or she lost her battle with cancer and she passed away last year. And it's very triggering, but to try to talk about this, but I mean, in general, to some people, because they really don't, of course, who wants to experience that? But my sense is, and my response is, anything, but even maybe especially cancer, doesn't want to be battled. It wants to be understood. Yeah. Why not? Why don't we understand cancer fully, completely, how it started, what it needs? That doesn't mean don't do anything. It doesn't mean give up. It doesn't mean roll over and decide your life is over because of a diagnosis. It does not mean that. But the fighting part, right? This this automatic human statement of, I've got to fight this, I've got to, and it's like, well, maybe there's another way of looking at it. And I think even these feeling senses can be looked at in that way.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Because you in understanding yourself, you have to understand how you're holding energy, right? You have to understand how you are resisting yourself and how you are opening yourself. And so once you understand those very basic things, which are not, they're not really that basic for a lot of people.
Right. It's true. We don't get taught this stuff when we're younger.
Exactly. But the thing is, you said it perfectly, right? You don't want to fight these things within you, right? As these triggers rise within you, as the energy that is rising within you, if you're going to look at it and fight it, you're just going to create more resistance to it. Right. Therefore, in being able to transmute energy, it's not about fighting whatever's coming up, or shifting from sadness to joy, for example. Fighting, like you were saying, if you suppress energy, right, or turn your back on it, make like it's not there, and I'm going to be happy instead, you're suppressing, you're resisting. Whereas if you were to look at that energy and, for example, sadness, and say, well, I'm feeling very sad right now, like I was saying earlier, most of the time it just needs to be seen. Yeah. It needs you to open enough space within your body to allow for the energy to rise. And although it doesn't feel good, and although it feels very uncomfortable, or it may bring up memories that is very uncomfortable that you don't want to look at, that's part of the process of letting go. It's part of the process, the transmutation of sadness into joy. But you have to go through it, because it's kind of like walking through a mist at first, right? It's like, I just got to feel it, just let myself feel it. But this is where it gets a little bit complex too, right? Because if we look at everything as kind of two sets of energy is either contracting, right, ebbing, or flowing and opening, expanding. Therefore, you always, again, you have to really understand, how does it feel when energy within me is contracting? And how does it feel when energy within me is expanding? And that's all you really need to know to help direct energy flow and movement through you. So when you're working with all of those emotions and energies, even if sadness does come up, and even if those memories do come up, if you're being gentle on yourself and kind to yourself, and seeing it and working yourself through it, it's kind of like putty, right? Or clay, molding it, bringing it through, and as it comes through, offer it, like you were saying, the understanding. What am I supposed to learn from this? What are you trying to teach me? How can I bring some peace to this memory, or my childhood, or the seed, or whatever, right? Working with it as if you're having a conversation with it, and working it through the body. That does so much, right? That's, in that way, you are expanding it rather than contracting it, right? And fighting it.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. As you were describing this sense of learning what energy feels like with you and how you process energy, I read something the other day that I thought was so beautiful, and it was how lovely to think of a laugh, and a very hearty laugh, as a joy that is so powerful that the body cannot contain it. You can't contain it. So we go by and it comes out like that, right? So at the same time, some boo-hooing, some wailing, right? Some being upset is at the other end of that spectrum, but it's also kind of a release valve, and allows some of that energy to move through you. But I wonder too, and you're right, it's not always really, really simple, because I know of some people who can get to, and this isn't to say don't do this, don't cry, but can get to the wailing, and then they can get to wallowing in that, yes, and remaining there. And that's a whole nother problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, like you're saying, it's very complex, right? It's like you are your own advocate. You have to do the work yourself, really. There's two things. Number one, it could be that the person needs to stay there, right, for a certain amount of time. If that's where they feel that they are for their expansion, right? Again, you have to think of yourself. Am I being gentle and kind through this? Or am I beating myself up over this?
Right. Yeah.
So then that, of course, if you're wallowing and you're kind of staying there and you're beating yourself up over it, then you're contracting the energy, and it's going more, if you think of dark and light, again, the two expressions of energy, you're going further into the darkness. But if you're there and you're saying, well, this is just how the energy is expressing through me right now, and I'm going to allow myself to wallow here, I'm going to allow myself to rest here, because for some reason that's just kind of what the energies are asking me to do at this time, and I'm going to respect them. I'm going to see them, right? But again, through that process, you have to be kind to yourself. The best thing is kind of to get out of any sort of stuckness, is like we were talking about, is understanding, like, what's the messages here is always kind of what I ask, is like, what's the messages here? Why am I here? What do my greater guides, my higher self need to tell me in this moment? And I always find, even in those moments of stuckness, say I'm wallowing, there's always information that's coming through. Like, this is connected to this, or this, you need to learn this, those types of things. And that energy will help move me through it in a way that I'm supposed to flow through it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think, getting back to like one of the words of the theme of the series this year, this powerful sense of a self, or when power is in ourself, it's when energy is flowing, right? It's when energy is flowing and not constricting, even if it's flowing from a sadness state. You can feel the power in that. You can feel the power in releasing it. But I think, I want to get back again to what clients kind of are presenting these days. And if I've heard this phrase once, I've heard it, I don't know, a dozen times in the last, even just 6-8 weeks. A variation on this phrase, I wonder if you're hearing it. They'll say, Candace, I'm typically a very positive person. I'm the person that my family and my friends, my coworkers come to, and I'm not feeling so much of that right now. And I'm really, really tired. And then they look at me and, and I tend to start talking about just that they aren't they aren't alone, right? A lot of us are feeling that way. What do you have to say about that?
There's a lot that was coming through as you're talking, that I want to go into in terms of like powerlessness, right? And empowerment. Okay, the first thing is, and unity. So let me get it all out. Okay, so if you think of positive and negative, right? That's still on the spectrum of duality, right? And holding a very positive state takes a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy that's like going outward, inward, whatever, but in order to maintain the positivity, right? But essentially, like what the guys are saying is, like at this time when you're trying to find unity within the duality, it's not necessarily about how positive you can be or positive versus negative, because that's still in the duality spectrum. It's taking you out of the unity and wholeness. What you're meant to aim for at this time is inner peace. It brings you back to center. It's held in the body in a way where you're not giving so much or taking so much. It just is. It's kind of like that neutral 0 point state, right? Balance, stability, strength. It's just here in the now moment. That's what you should be aiming for. And from there, that's where love grows. It's where empowerment grows. It's where your ability to hold space for everyone who still exists in that duality place is the most helpful place to hold space. And so if someone is trying to hold such a positive place, right? Because essentially I think in their minds as well, if I hold such a positive place, I'm neutralizing the negative, right? I'm somehow equalizing the energy in some way. But also understand that as as much of the positive energy that you're holding, there is, on the other hand, the negative energy that still exists there, right? But if you were to bring it together in a lot of ways, it needs to bridge energy. And if you are holding such a positive place in order to, shift the negative energy there, and you're getting burnt out in that place, then it means that you're still holding something within yourself that's of the opposite as well. It means that there's still something there that's saying, hey, this isn't it. It's it, because essentially the body wants to get to a place of balance, right? It's all about balance. And if you're running back and forth within negative and positive, it's like there's not necessarily a balance there. Or if you're holding so much positive energy and the negative energy, it's like there's still an imbalance there, if you will, too. So bring yourself back to center always. Find that sort of inner glow from your now moment. And from there, you don't have to try so hard to be positive, right? You don't have to try so hard to hold that place that shifts the negative energy. It just is. But this goes back to the whole empowerment and disempowerment thing. So for example, because this was coming through before a call that I needed to address, in terms of people who may be very empathic, very strongly feeling people who or are doing the work, for example, like you were talking about, that person who needs to hold a very positive place, right? It gets to a point where you really have to ask yourself, okay, is what I'm feeling disempowering me or empowering me, right? So if a person in that very positive place then gets burnt out, do they feel empowered or do they feel disempowered in that place, right? All of their energy is taken away. And so again, coming back to center and finding that 0 point within yourself really helps to create a foundation, if you will, of stability that you can then work off of. But that stability and that foundation has to come from an empowered place. Therefore, empaths, for example, there are two things that can work with empaths. There's a lot of energy that's given away and a lot of energy that's absorbed. So in that way, the empath will say, I feel drained at the end of the day. I can't hang out with people, right? Like it's just too much in the environment that's going on. They'll shelter themselves away from things. So if you take a look at that empath, and if the empath really asks themselves, do I feel empowered by my gift or disempowered by my gift? They'll probably say, I feel disempowered by my gift, right? Mm-hmm. But the other thing that empaths need to understand is that that is a gift, essentially. And if you strengthen that core part of who you are, then it actually serves as a powerful way to hold space for other people and actually energize your external environment. But the thing is this goes back all the way back to the seeds of thought of where that empathic ability and gift started from. It was birthed open from probably something from childhood or something from very far past, right? That created that seed of fear or that seed of trauma or whatever that created your ability to be extra sensory or extra sensitive. So it's all about kind of going back to that as well. And everything we were talking about, healing all of those layers in order to shift your foundation into a more empowered place, right? From inner strength. I know it's there's so much to talk about, like, and there's just so much information that's like, I'm trying to like hold on to this, and then there's just
I'm enjoying myself a lot. In my mind, I'm actually thinking and wondering, you offer such beautiful presentations, helping people, especially in those shorter videos that you produce. And I'm wondering, I know this might sound a little cheesy to even ask you such a thing, but I wonder if you might tell me like when and where you are when some of this comes to you. Are you always like in deep meditation, or are you like carrying the basket of laundry into the bedroom and putting away your socks when some of this stuff comes to you? Can you tell me sort of your inner dialogue, where and how you get to where you are able to so beautifully and succinctly express some of the thoughts that you do?
Yeah, it's all an embodiment, right? So it actually started, when I was exploring QHHT and BQH and working with clients and I got to understand the higher self. And I realized the higher self's purpose at this moment in time is to want to embody more so that we can co-create an experience together. And so my journey for a very long time has been about integrating more of the higher self as an embodiment, not just through a meditation, not just through a regression or a hypnosis, right? How can we, because we are essentially one. As you open up your channels, you're receiving more of the information of your higher self to co-create, to have those intuitive thoughts, to have intentions, to birth manifestations and in alignment with your higher self, right? Mm-hmm. So at this point, it's just kind of like there's an on and there's an off switch, really. It's like I'm very inquisitive, and I'm very deep in nature. So I'm always kind of wanting to know deeper purposes and just meanings and what's going on with the energies, right? And I can read energy very clearly as well when I'm talking with people, or just kind of feel it. I feel it through myself. So when I feel something, it's like, okay, what is this connected to? And I'm always kind of analyzing those things. And it's more of a conversation with my highest self as I'm analyzing the things that are happening within myself. So usually if I'm going through something, it's not just a one-time thing through the day. It's kind of like it goes on throughout the whole day, and I'm kind of asking myself these questions and analyzing it and transmuting energy. And all along the way through that entire process, it's, my higher self is constantly like feeding me information and downloads to understand things better. Yeah.
I think it's one of your most recent videos, little videos that you put up that it was just, I think I listened to it 3 times. I didn't quite memorize it though, but it was about being an empath and walking up to a door and then not going through the door. Do you remember that one that it was so recent? That was so beautiful. If you could explain kind of how that fits in with all of this, I would love for you to.
Well, it's based off of experience too. Like everything I share is things I experience myself. So as like a deeply feeling person who used to be very drained and very like I need my time away from everything, right? In a lot of ways, I felt disempowered. And through my own working through that and healing and all of that entire process, my higher self was telling me, hey, this is not something to be disempowered by. This is where your gift is, right? Because as I've learned through my journey, when I work with other people, I feel the other person. And even when I was doing BQH sessions with clients, in the very beginning, I would feel so drained because I would just give everything to that person. After a 4 or 5 hour session, I was like, I needed to sleep the rest of the day. And I realized like this isn't how it's supposed to be. And so shifting from giving, and again, just being aware, how much energy am I giving? How much am I taking on? You have to be very aware of yourself and those types of things and how your body is holding energy. But so being able to shift from a very disempowered place into seeing this as a very empowered thing, in terms of, like I was saying, when you're disempowered, you're giving all of the energy away and taking on unnecessary energy. When you feel more empowered, and this has a lot to do with your core, your gut space, right? As an empath, especially, it's where a lot of the energy is harnessed. And so that's also why probably a lot of empaths have gut issues, myself as well. So a lot of strengthening that gut space, I realized how powerful the energy is in holding space for other people. When you kind of get going back to the whole, it's not about being positive or negative. If you find that inner peace within your now moment here, that sort of 0 point, you don't have to exert so much energy to hold space. It's the natural life force that moves through that gift of just being deeply feeling, or there's so many different ways that a person holds their gifts in their body. But it's energy that can actually move outward to energize a space rather than take from a space, if that makes sense. So if you realize how you can be empowered by your gifts, such as empathy, it actually opened the door for me to move into unconditional love and really understand what unconditional love is. Because if I'm an empath and I'm absorbing energy and giving too much energy away, I don't really understand what unconditional love is in that moment, right? It's like there's a very imbalance, energy is very off balance. So it's only when you start to become more empowered, which is why, and that is part of integrating more of your inner truth. That's all connected. Self-love, that's all connected. Is when you start to understand really what unconditional love is. A lot of people can't grasp what unconditional love is because they're not there yet, right? They still have to maybe integrate self-love, for example, first. Take it baby steps. But empathy, you're at the doorway to experiencing something so much more if you allow yourself to walk through it and allow it to empower you instead of disempower you.
That's a really interesting statement about, the steps moving towards unconditional love. And I think that I can see a large swath of people, wanting and professing unconditional love and then completely skipping over the self-love place that is like a necessary foundational element to even get to this other place. I mean, but that doesn't mean, go ahead.
Unconditional love is also ever expanding too, right? We don't, as a human being, we actually don't even really know what unconditional love is in its pure essence. We can only grab hold of what we know through our perception at this moment, through feeling mostly, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily about attaining a certain level of unconditional love. It's just asking yourself in this moment, what does unconditional love feel like for me? Right. And then as it grows, your understanding of it grows.
Yeah, you've so beautifully expressed that in some of your offerings to the public. I think that that's a wonderful way to kind of wrap it up here, that we're moving into these new expressions of unconditional love, which isn't easy to do sometimes, watching what's going on out there. And I think we kind of have to be nice to ourselves. But some of what you've talked about today, I think, is going to be very helpful, especially this whole idea. If you think about who we were, even if you were into this kind of metaphysical, spiritual stuff a couple of years ago, who you were back then and who you are now, you're probably different. I know that I am, and I know that there's been a lot of growth, and there's a lot of things that we've gone through. And it's stirring up a lot of stuff that we didn't even know was there, right? We didn't even know it was there. And now we know it's there. So now that we can work on it, but it's not over yet, is it? And there's more to do.
Absolutely. I kind of want to go back to one of the first questions you asked me, because it keeps coming into my mind, that I didn't address in terms of unity.
Yes.
And how you're talking about unity can be this one thing, or it can be that other scary thing, right? In a place of like
hive mind,
choice, hive mind, right? Mm-hmm. And that goes back into everything that I was saying about how there's the two pathways, right? The constricting pathway or the expanding pathway, right? There's those two energy avenues, if you will. So if you think of, for example, dark and light, creation and destruction, they are the same energy, but expressed in two different ways, right? The same thing can go with unity. It can be expressed in two different ways, if you will. There can be an expansive aspect to unity as well as a constricting aspect to unity, right? So it's all about, like I was saying earlier, in every moment, are you expanding the energy through you, or are you constricting the energy? Are you resisting the energy through you? So of course, those same concepts, as we can see, it's the flipping of the coin, right? As above, so below. Everything, it's the same thing. Just if you need to focus enough to take the next steps in your expansion, and you'll understand what that unity and that wholeness and the connection within all things will feel like in that avenue, in that pathway, versus the other constricting pathway, which is more fear-based, darker energy, destructive energy as well, too. So just keeping that in mind, then you know that the expanding pathway also integrates unconditional love. It also folds all of these things in order to expand our consciousness, in order to help us learn how to maintain higher frequencies of energy, in order to step into a physical reality through those energies, right? Manifested from those energies. And the outcomes, you will notice, will be much different in existing in those two different paths.
You know, I've asked various forms of that question to a lot of different people. I don't think I've liked anyone's answer better than the one that you just gave. That's brilliant. Quite beautiful and quite hopeful, you know. I think a lot of people are feeling like they've lost a little bit of hope. And I think that's a wonderful thought to keep in mind as we continue to move forward and try to create a world that we all would like to live in. So, Jessica, how can people find you?
My website is www.jessicadelmar.com. And from there, you can see links to Instagram, YouTube, and book a session.
Yeah. Instagram's where it's at. You've created some brilliant things over there. Truly mesmerizing, quite lovely work. I've enjoyed spending time with you today. Thank you so much for being a part of Quantum Realms 2022. And I wish for you the most beautiful rest of the year.
Oh, thank you so much. You too.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. And stay tuned for the next episode of Quantum Realms 2022. Happy to have you here. Till next time.